Welcome to another episode of Washington in Focus. I'm your host, Tim Clauser, with the Center Square's Washington State Capitol correspondent, Carlene Johnson, here to talk about a recent story of hers about a once notorious rapist out of the Spokane area that was very active in the 70s and 80s. It was recently released and landed in the western half of the state, kind of is jumping between communities with the latest move, putting him only a few hundred feet away from an elementary school in Federal Way. Carlene, why don't you tell me about this story and kind of what led up to him landing right next to this school?
Yeah, we're talking about the notorious Spokane South Hill Rapist Kevin Coe. He was, as you mentioned, released after being civilly committed following his initial prison term from those rapes back in the 70s and 80s. For folks that are maybe not familiar with the story or, lived in this area. I mean, I've lived in the state my whole life, and I remember back during the late 70s and early 80s when, there were dozens of rapes and they hadn't caught this guy. He ended up ultimately only being convicted of 4 of the rapes. And then all but one of those convictions was then tossed out by the Washington State Supreme Court because a couple of the victims were hypnotized to kind of have memory recall from the rapes. So even though there was DNA evidence and other things that tied Kevin Coe to those attacks, he ended up only being convicted of 1 rape. He had other issues behind bars that increased the length of his prison stay. And then at the end of his prison stay, he was reevaluated and determined that he had a high likelihood of reoffending, that he was still determined to be a sexually violent predator. And they sent him to McNeil Island. And he was there for another 20 years up until they decided he's no longer a danger. He's elderly. He's got some mobility issues, and they said that he could be released, and he was on the 1st of October. And then the ping-ponging between cities began.
Yeah, before we get into that, I understand he was released because he's an older man now. They think he might not reoffend, but correct me if I'm wrong. Coe never admitted guilt to any of these rapes, did he? Or did he participate in treatment?
He did not, and that was the couple of the lawmakers that I've spoken to about this case that have that intend to try and get legislation through during the 2026 session, including Representative Jenny Graham, who from that area, have said, this shouldn't be, if you don't cop to what you did, ask for remorse or forgiveness, whatever that looks like, and then participate in treatment so that your mindset of being, one of the most violent sexual predators certainly this state has ever known, you shouldn't have the chance to see the light of day outside, being confined. That's the argument, and that's the hope of the legislation they're working on right now. And some of the victims' families, told the Indeterminate Sentencing Review Board ahead of the judge in Spokane deciding he should get out, said, please, he never, admitted that he raped my mother, my sister, whatever. And the torture he's caused our family, and he never participated in treatment, never went to all the required group, things. And while he was behind bars, committed other offenses. So you're right. That's the argument, that he shouldn't have been released. But the ISRB board decided otherwise. And the judge in Spokane really didn't have any say in it at that point. Basically just had to sign off on it once that decision had been made. And, and then he comes to this side of the mountains.
Yeah. So I think you had reported on this before and said, he was initially supposed to go to Federal Way where he is now. But then that kind of led to a lot of community backlash. He may have gone to Auburn and now he's back to Federal Way. Can you kind of explain what happened there and kind of what the mayors and the elected officials in these cities were saying in response to this?
Yeah. So I, actually live in Federal Way. So I was getting, some members of, city council and the mayor's office kind of tipping me off what was happening before we knew where he was going to end up living, right? Because he has to go and live in, a group home setting. So there's some limited supervision. But remember, he's released unconditionally. So he can come and go. I mean, he does have some mobility issues, but he can come and go as he pleases should he decide to, go to the grocery store, whatever. But you're right. He was going to come to Federal Way, a group home just off South 288th, not too far off Pack Highway. So kind of the center of Federal Way is where he was going to live. Before he actually came to the city, there was pushback. The mayor's office put out a couple of statements saying, hold up, we weren't notified. We didn't know he's coming. We don't want him here. I spoke to a couple of members of city council who were none too pleased and also, put some things on social media. There was enough pushback at that point where I guess Mr. Coe and the folks that had decided to house him here said, okay, maybe Auburn is a better place for you. And at that point, he moved into, and this is all taking place in the last couple of weeks. At that point, he moved into a group home very near Muckleshoot Casino, kind of on the top of the plateau there in Auburn, and moved into that home. Again, the situation was no notice at that point before he moved in given to the city or local police. They basically find out day of, by the way, here's your new neighbor. And that's all that the state's required to do. And so at that point, Auburn Mayor Nancy Backus issued a statement saying, we're none too pleased about this. And then the Muckleshoot tribe got involved. And because the tribes were not consulted and they have, a number of tribal rights to have a say in this, they pushed back and said, we don't want Kevin Coe on our, reservation land in the city of Auburn. And that led to him again being pushed back to Federal Way, which is what happened this week. And again, my phone started ringing going, hey, by the way, he's back in town. So, different home in Federal Way, now in the southwest part of the city.
So the people facilitating this move, they knew that Federal Way was in opposition to it before, from the immense backlash that they received. What was kind of behind the move back to Federal Way? Did they consult the mayor before doing so? Did they say, look, we heard your concerns. This is going to happen anyways?
Yeah, they don't. They just basically, it comes under the jurisdiction of the King County Sheriff's Department. They notified, and I saw a series of emails blasts on Tuesday morning. It was like 5-something in the morning. The King County Sheriff's Office notifies the mayor, Jim Farrell, in Federal Way. By the way, Kevin Coe is moving in. Here's the home. Here's the location in Southwest Federal Way, different than the other proposed option. And then the police are notified within basically about that same time. Police then sent emails out to, back to the city. There was an exchange. Then the whole city council was notified. I was then contacted by one of the city council members saying, here's the deal. He's coming. Here's the home. So I drove there on Tuesday to see if Mr. Coe was in fact there yet. It didn't look like it, as my article indicated. All the windows were open, and you can see a wheelchair accessible ramp going up to the front of the home. And you can even look in the bedroom windows and see like there's a hospice type bed in there and just a modest kind of dresser and a television. And it said room number 2. And then the next window was room number 1. So you can see it's a group home, set up maybe for people with mobility issues. The neighbors didn't know who their new neighbor is about to be, and they were none too pleased.
Yeah. So what did they say? Did you realize Coe wasn't there and then you went next door and knocked to see if they had been told? I mean, not to mention the fact that it's within spitting distance of an elementary school. I think you took a picture, from the outside just showing how close it was.
Yeah, Brigadoon Elementary is literally just over 200 feet away, would be to the east of where the home is located. It's in a cul-de-sac. And then there's one more street over with another cul-de-sac, and Brigadoon Elementary campus is on the other side of that adjacent cul-de-sac. And we measured off Google Maps. It's like 220 feet, from the home to Brigadoon Elementary campus. So it's right there. But again, as we mentioned, since he's released with no conditions, unconditional release, he can live next to a school, a daycare, a playground. There are no conditions. Now, the community, now that he's moving in, and I think as of Wednesday, he's actually at the home. The community now is notified. Anybody within, I think it's like a quarter-mile radius, receives notice. That doesn't mean that he can't be near the school. And I would think there might be some concerned families there, because even if he's got some mobility issues, he still can use a walker. He still, is ambulatory. So I don't know, if it was my next door neighbor, it would concern me. If I had a child going to that elementary school, it's certainly concerning given, his background. And people can say he's 78 years old now. He's no threat. He's not, wouldn't have a proclivity for, sexual violence now. I don't know. I'm unconvinced, I guess I wouldn't try to convince others to be okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting, especially hearing the concerns from the neighbor who has grandchildren that are often at the residence, and said, look, it's a very uncomfortable situation to want to have my grandkids to come here, but knowing that this convicted rapist lives right next door and then the school is so close, I imagine that a lot of parents are going to come back and say to the district, the city, the mayor, and the facilitators of this move and say, look, why did this happen? Why weren't we told ahead of time? And I get maybe the rules don't require them to be notified, but that's still going to be a concern for a lot of parents. And after the backlash that we saw when he first landed in Federal Way and then in Auburn, I'm really looking to see, will he be moved again? How long will this stay at this group home last, and what impact those parents' feedback will have? But Carlene, appreciate you covering this. And for anyone else that wants to catch future updates on this story, you can read Carlene's content at thecentersquare.com. But otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Washington in Focus.